A good Erev Yontif, everyone, and especially a good Erev Yontif to HaRav Shleimer Zayin Gesund, and thanking you for enabling all of us to have opportunity to share some Divrei Torah. When else should we share Divrei Torah, and linking the past year to the new year, and that the bridge that we travel on should be along the route of Divrei Torah, which is what this program has been all about since its inception. Thank you so much. And wishing the whole Olam a ksiva v'chsima tova, good kibet shtia, yimale Hashem kol mishales, libchem v'libeinu l'tova, and that everyone and all their requests and all their needs be filled. There's a Gemara in Gittin, Daf Nun Vav, that discusses the extraordinary meeting between Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Aspasianus, in which he greets the Roman general, Havel. He greets the Roman general with the royal greeting, calls him the Melech, calls him the king. And this was not yet known. And Aspasianus himself didn't know it. But he did respond, but if you think I'm the king, imalka ano ad ha'idna amai loy osis legaboy. If you recognize that I'm the king, then why haven't you been here earlier? One of the extraordinary features of Klal Yisrael is b'matzai menucha k'damnucha tchila. Says the Ishbitzer, the Tiferes Yeruchim, the Ratzin Rebbe Zecher Tzadik L'Bracha brings it, b'shem his Zaydis, the Ishbitzer, that the pasuk says that Shimi ben Gera, when he heard that David HaMelech was returning to Yerushalayim, Shimi ben Gera, who had sinned to David, runs to the Yarden as David is crossing the Yarden, and greets him and says, Chatasi, and says, but I want you to know that my schus is Basi Tchila, L'Beis Yosef. I am the first who comes to greet you and to accept you. And there David HaMelech says to Shimi ben Gera, Loi Somus Vayishba HaMelech, says, you shall not perish, you shall not die. Even though you were murdered by Malchus, Loi Somus. And he swore to him, Shalom. My Rabbi says the Ishbitzer, that which we come to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for slichas before the Yom Adin, which is odd. Why would a person go and seek out his mishpat before he has to? Everyone who has a mishpat, everyone who has a court case, he delays it. The response, we can say, we've come, Eibishter. We've come. And tomorrow in Shul, when the Baal Tefillah from his seat will begin and say HaMelech, and that pachad that falls on all of us, that we're in the presence of the Melech, that pachad, we're able to, however, say also, Eibishter, Basi Tchila, I came even before you came. Now it's Dirshu Hashem Behimatzai. Now the Gemara says in Yuma, when are those days? Those are Aseres Yemei Tshuva. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is amongst us. Dirshu Hashem Behimatzai, Kru, we call out to him. When? When he's amongst us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu condescended to descend, to be among us. And that's what the HaMelech is. We say it from our seats, and then we, with trepidation, approach the Amid, and we all are completely, hopefully, in the mode that we're standing in front of the Melech, Malcham and Melachim. There's the Beis Yosef, the Rambam, in his Nusach HaTfilah says, a dava nifla, he talks about what we say in our tefillas, what we add on Rosh Hashanah. And he says, Minik Pashut, Shemavarchim Bracha Shlishis Benusach Zeh, B'shnei Yomim Shel Rosh Hashanah, B'chol Tefillah U'Tefillah, Me'arba Tefillas. This is Pashut that we say, B'chein Tein Pachtecha. It's Pashut that we say, B'chein Tein Kavoi. It's Pashut that we say, that's Pashut means it has become spread in Gans Klal Yisrael. Pashut, minut pashut, that means it's a widespread accepted meaning that we say, v'chein tein pachtecha, v'chein tein kovid, v'chein tzadikim. Those who daven nusach svar, v'chein yiskadish, that we say all, that's a minig pashut that we say in Rosh Hashanah. U'miktsas, noagu, v'chein noagu miktsas l'var chaysa, ha'isa nusach, also on Yom Kippur. But it's mashma from the Rambam that the nusach of v'chein tein pachtecha is be'ikah the nusach is meant for Rosh Hashanah more than for Yom Kippur, because the minig pashut for all is Rosh Hashanah, and only for miktsas and Yom Kippur. For us, there is no difference. But we're talking about in the time of the Rambam, the minig of the Rambam. Why would it be so that it's more appropriate for Rosh Hashanah than for Yom Kippur? I think it goes back to the Nakuda of the Melech. Rabbeinu Sadia Goyen, among the various tamim that he gives for blowing shofar, one of them is coronation. A Melech is coronated with Malchus Rekiyas ke Malchus Ha'ara. The heavenly kingdom manifests itself to us the way we're accustomed to earthly kingdoms, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu also has kaviyachal coronation. And certain Chassidim refer to Leil Rosh Hashanah as a koronatzia nacht, the night of coronation, where we're mamlech HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon says that that's one of the tamim for shofar. Yedua, that the Vilna Gaon holds that that's the ikka kavana that we're supposed to have on Rosh Hashanah, is that we're mamlech the Eibishter upon us. Not our personal bakashas and our personal needs, which is, of course, the want of everyone, that we have an opportunity to pour out our heart to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Vilna Gaon says the ikka kavana is to be mamlech HaKadosh Baruch Hu upon us. We'll come to that in a moment. Of course, we're all familiar with Rabbi Yisrael Zalanta, who, despite the fact that he's a Talmid Shel Hagra, says that that's not our madrega. Our madrega is that we have to appeal and beg for ourselves. And therefore, he permits saying that that would be the most honest approach on Rosh Hashanah, is that we actually make the appeals for our own needs and so on, but all in the context that he's the Melech. And that the Melech is able, Melech Roif Eichel Basa. He's the Melech. Melech Roif Rachman. Roif, they say over, I heard from perhaps from Rabbi Lapian, that a Melech is a Hakoil. The Roifei is the one who has the talent to heal. Neman is the one who's trustworthy, that he will actually do that. That's all that we have in the Eibishter, but all in the context of Melech, Avinu, Malkeinu. It's all in the context of Melech. Some of us stress more the Avinu, and some of us stress more the Malkeinu, but it's in the context of Melech. Therefore, the brachos of the Chen Tein Pachtecha, which the Beis Yosef explains, is Malchias. That's be'ikah for Rosh Hashanah, even more so than Yom Kippur. Rabbi say, there's an extraordinary Avud Raham. And the Torah, without quoting the Avud Raham, says the same Nakuda. Did you notice that it's an interesting nusach that we have v'chein tein pachtecha, v'chein tein kavod, v'chein tzadikim, all of the lashon of v'chein. Where does this lashon of v'chein come from? So the Torah brings v'tiknu loimer v'chein lashon amikra, because that's a lashon of the pasuk. Uv'chein avoy el hamelach. Esther, who didn't know what the outcome would be, who took her life in her hands, and approached Achashverosh, not knowing. She came to the Melech. V'chein Ovay el HaMelech was her lashon, so we borrow that lashon and we say a series uvecheins. Azoy steht in Avodram und in Torah. I say, if I may, I would like to add perhaps a layer of understanding, another layer. The Ibn Ezra says a note on the pasuk of V'chein Ovay el HaMelech. What were the words of Esther? Leich knois skol Yehudim hanimtsoyin b'Shushan v'tzumu olai v'al toichlu v'al tishtu shloishes yomim layla v'yoyim gam ani v'naroisai otzum kein uvechein ovoi el hamelech ashaloi kadas. And if I'll be lost, the kasha of adati. Those are the psukim. The Ibn Ezra says as follows: V'hinei loy ochlu be'erev v'is'anu shnei yomim v'shnei leilos ki ha'kosav hu layla v'yoyim. It's an absolute fast. V'hinei Esther botcha be'elokeha al kein his answer v'loy botcha b'yofya. She relied on her maker and not in her beauty. Rabbi say, what I'm understanding in the Ibn Ezra is that the Ibn Ezra is asking a question. How do you impress Achashverosh? Who is Achashverosh? On the basis that he select Esther herself. Who is he? He's the great. He's from the most common. He's really not royal, and he's a common person, and he's an exhibitionist. How does he spend the first psukim? How do we hear how he spends his time? Partying and baharoisa. He has to show off all of his treasures, as the Vilna Gaon explains. He showed off the tatraf oitzrois that he illegally inherited from the Nebuchadnezzar, and now he's displaying them 6 a day because there's 6 lashonos in the pasuk. 6 a day, that's 180 days, as the pasuk says. Yomim Rabim. So he's displaying 180 days. He's displaying all that he has, and when he runs out of it, the last thing that he has is his wife. And he puts her on display as well, and that doesn't work out so well. So he executes her. And then he selects, and we know on the basis he selects Esther. It doesn't make sense that Esther should come and appeal to him in a state of fasting 2-3 days. What does a person look like after they fast 1 day, 2 days, 3 days? That's not how you impress an Achashverosh. I think this is what Ibn Ezra means. When she said that she'll fast 3 days, Esther botcha be'elokeha al kein his answer. In other words, I'm not here to impress anybody, not even the king, the earthly king. I'm only here to impress the Kaviyachal, the heavenly king. And with those words, she said, Uvechein Ovay El HaMelech. On Rosh Hashanah, there's a paralytic Geldwerth from the Rosh Hashiva Hagoyin Rabel Yisvei. He says, we learn Tekiya Shofar. We learn the Truah, the Yebefta, the broken sound. Chazal learn it out of the mother of Sischa. The mother of Sischa is sitting by the window. The Malbim learns that she was sitting by a crystal ball, trying to find out, where is her son? Is he coming home? Is he not? and she's very, very upset. And she moans and she sobs. And those are the sounds that eventually become instructive to us for how to make the sound of the shofar, the trua, the broken sound, which represents the broken heart and the cry of the Yid. We learn that out of her. It's because the Nashim, Chamois around her, tried to convince her, no, he's coming back. Everything is fine with him. Everything is fine with him. Perhaps he's delayed dividing the booty, or according to the Malbim, that will be the interpretation of the scene that they saw in the crystal. He's coming back. And she was weeping because she sensed the truth. Later, they turned her around. Says Rebellia, Zechet Tzadik L'Bracha, Philadelphia Rosh Yeshiva. Tekiah Shofar has to be a moment of reality, of truth, where people don't fake themselves out. They don't tell themselves that they did well when they didn't do well. We have a tendency in our times, a feel-good kind of tendency. We make ourselves feel good and better. When Rosh Hashanah is a time of reality, where we have to face where we weren't so good. You have to be boiteach, and when we're trying to look good in front of other people. I'm not here to impress anyone, just the Melech Malchei Amlochim. I wanted to, that's the V'chein Tein Pachadecho, and that's the Rosh Hashanah, the Avodah. I'm coming in front of a king. I think I shared a story with an Olam last night that I'd like to repeat. A Yidid of mine told me that his father knew this Yid who the story happened to. In Yerushalayim, 115, 120 years ago, there was a Yid who was working on a construction site, and he injured himself. Something fell on his leg and crushed his leg. Yerushalayim did not have the ability, didn't have the infrastructure to be able to handle this medical emergency. And in order to repair his leg, he needed to travel to Europe, to the Mecca of medicine at that time, which was Vienna. But he would require great funds. He went to Reb Chaim Sonnenfeld, great HaRav of Yerushalayim, Agon HaTzadik, Reb Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, and asked him for help, and he helped him raise funds. When those funds were raised, he traveled. But it seems that it wasn't enough. And by the time he came to the doctor's office in Vienna, and they presented him with the bill that he had to pay up front, he didn't have the money. And the receptionist said, there's nothing to talk about. If you don't have the money up front, you will not have the surgery. He went outside and he sat down on a bench. And he put his head down and he began to weep. Here he is, a cripple, no money for the operation and barely money to make it home. Who's going to help him? What's he going to do now? And as he's sitting there, he feels a tap on his shoulder. And he looks up and there's a gentleman standing above him. And the gentleman asks him, what's your problem? The Gentile, Lahavdil. And he says, here's my story. And he tells him the story. The man says, have no fear. Puts his hand in his pocket, takes out a pad, and writes something down in German and hands it to him and says, go back to the doctor. He said, but I don't have the money. He said, just do what I tell you. And there was something about the person that he trusted. And he went back. When he came back into the office, they asked him, "You have the money?" He said, no, I don't. Forget about it. He says, no, just look at this. And he showed them the note. When they saw the note, he said, "Wait here 1 moment." The receptionist ran to the back. A few moments later, the surgeon comes out, and the surgeon says, "Are you available tomorrow morning? Surgery is scheduled for you." He says, "But I don't have the money. I won't be able to even pay you afterwards." He says, "It's pro bono. The surgery will be done, and you don't owe a penny." And that's, the surgery was done. He was, I don't know the details, but he was basically put back into shape. And now the local people of Vienna helped him make his way home back to Yerushalayim by train, by boat, whatever it took. He came back to Yerushalayim. His first stop was Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld to thank the Rav for everything he had done for him. The Rav heard this remarkable story. He says, "Mamish nisim gluyim. Would you by any chance still have the note that this man wrote for you?" So he said, "I think I do." Put his hand in his pocket and he said, "Yeah, I have it." Hands it to him. Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, who was a Talmud, before he was a Talmud of Rabbi Shua Leib Diskin in Yerushalayim, he was a Talmud of the Ksav Seifer in Pressburg. Pressburg is a neighboring city not far from Vienna. It's across the border, but culturally and all the language is very, they speak German there. Kiyadua. Chaim Sonnenfeld read German well, reads the note, looks at the person, says, "Do you have any idea who wrote this note?" He says, "No." He says, "The Kaiser, Franz Josef, is signed on this note." He says, "The Kaiser?" He says, "The Kaiser." Now let me explain parenthetically that the habit of this monarch, who was a benevolent monarch, was to travel amongst his people incognito so that he'd be able to see how they fare. He was a concerned king. He was known. And now this is the way he had appeared, walking on himself. He appeared, of course, like a gentleman, but not like a king. And he had written the note because when he saw that this was a desperate situation, he intervened. And of course, the doctor recognized it and respected it. When the Yerushalayim Yid, when this patient heard, he burst into tears. He started to weep. Rabbi Chaim Sonnenfeld asked him, "Why are you crying now? Baruch Hashem, Haskat HaRefuah." He says, Rebbe, wollte ich gewusst, dass das ist der Melech allein? Wollte ich noch gebeten auf Fuß? Ich wollte doch alles gebeten. Would have only prayed and asked for a leg? I would have asked him, "Give me everything. I have nothing. I have no panos, I have no this, I have no that. You're a melech." When this Yid said that to Reb Chaim Sonnenfeld, now it was his turn. He burst into tears. And he said, "Oi, wollte ich letzten Rosh Hashanah euch gewusst. If last Rosh Hashanah I also was perfectly aware that I'm in the presence of the Melech, had I been perfectly aware that I'm in the presence of the Melech, I also would have asked for everything." Like Rabbi say, it's only a matter of how aware we become and allow ourselves to be. How we step into this Rosh Hashanah. The Eibishter, in a very painful way, made it very easy for us. Tov Shin Pei Aleph was not an easy year. Tov Shin Pei Aleph was a year in which Klal Yisrael lived out step by step when the Sana Toikif, the Miyichya, Miyamos, the Mi Bekitzai, Mi Loi Bekitzai. Last week we had Mi Bamayim, In Denver a few weeks ago, we had me b'cherev of a Taira Heilige Yeshiva Bacha. Shmuley Silverberg, last week, Rav Eismandel. All of us, we can't list the people in COVID. Yireim, Shleimim, Tahirim, Yidden, Miron, Karlin, Turin in Italy, Miami, 3 Bachrim in the Ukraine. It's a year in which, in full relief, the Nisan HaTokiv played out. A person who doesn't recognize at the Melech für the Welt has no senses. There's a mashal from Rab Chaim Brisker. Rab Chaim tells that there was a person who had no parnasa. He had to resort to smuggling, but it was terrifying because if he was caught, he would pay with his life. He would pay with his life. He had to get this contraband across the river, in which he had an accomplice on the other side. Says Rab Chaim, there were 3 parties to the crime, 3 actors. The 2 smugglers and the horse. The night before, the 2 smugglers, the night before the act, the 2 smugglers didn't have the nerve to sleep. They were up the whole night, worrying, praying. Says Rab Chaim, but the horse slept well. The horse is going through the same thing. Aber der Chaferd, versteht nicht. Doesn't realize the implications of the event. HaMelech be'ir, v'chein tein pachtecha, Rosh Hashanah, coronatio. The Melech is here. HaMelech, Imalka ana, ad ho'idna, amai lo yos is kaboy. So we asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we came. B'matzoi menucha, we came. We've gotten up every morning for slichas. Achenu b'nei Ashkenaz for the last 10 days. Achenu b'nei Sfarad for the last 30 days. We're Yidden stepping into a shmita, where that which we thought was ours, we know is not ours. That's the message of Shemitah in the Sefer Chinuch. We recognize it's all yours. LaHashem ha'aretz u'mloya. Va'aretz nasan. Viful megit is nasan l'bnei adam. The Eibishter gives us some crumbs off his shulchan gevaya. We recognize that. And tomorrow when the Chazan will start with HaMelech, we'll know we're in his presence. That's our answer. And Tavshin Pei Aleph, unfortunately, painfully, made us wholly aware. We dare not lose the lesson because we paid for it very dearly. So Erev Rosh Hashanah, Rabbi Say, the Torah tells us we shower, we take haircuts, and we have betachin that a nest will happen to us. But the Drisha tells us that betachin can only come after the pachat. And then b'chein tzadikim. Let us be zoicha. Let us be zoicha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will grant us a ksiva v'chsima taiva, that tichla shana v'kil loiseha, and as in the words of the Paitan, the tachel shana u'bichaseha. Let this year begin from, and we could say even as Tavshin Pei Aleph is departing. There's still an entire year left in a minute. In a minute before Tavshin Pei Beis, everything could change. And everything could change l'tayv. So the Eibishter's helfen geben. We should all be zeicher for ganz Klal Yisrael. To aksiva v'chasima toiva. We should be nichter v'safran shal tzadikim gemurim la'alta l'chaim toivim. And that the Eibishter should schicken jeder einer was darf. Jeder einer was darf. Yimale Hashem kol mishalis. Libchem v'libeinu l'toiva. A good gebencht Jahr.